I've been turning this one over for a few days now, and the more I dug into it, the more I realized this isn't a story about tariffs or diplomatic spats. This is about whether a smaller country can actually say no to the most powerful nation on earth and survive. Because here's what just happened. The United States presented Canada with what amounts to a list of demands. Not suggestions, not talking points, demands. And Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, the former central banker who turned politician, the guy who ran the Bank of England during a global financial crisis, looked at every single one of those demands and said no. All 5 of them. Let's start with the number that frames all of this. Canada sends roughly 75% of everything it exports straight to the United States. Every barrel of oil, every plank of lumber, every car door, 3/4 of it goes south. That's not a trade relationship, that's a dependency. And for the last year, Washington has been squeezing that dependency like a vice. So let's walk through what Trump actually wanted and why Carney said no to each one. Demand 1. Stop trading with China. In early January 2026, Carney flew to Beijing and signed a deal with President Xi Jinping. Canada agreed to roll back some of the tariffs it had slapped on Chinese electric vehicles, and China in turn lowered duties on Canadian agricultural products, canola, lobster, pork. Sectors that had been hammered. Trump's initial reaction was actually positive. He said publicly it was what Carney should be doing, and that signing trade deals with China was smart. Then 1 week later, he flipped entirely, threatened a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods, 100% on everything, and accused Carney of turning Canada into a Chinese shipping depot. Carney's response? He went on camera and said Canada has no interest in a full free trade deal with China, that what was signed was narrow and consistent with Canada's existing obligations under the North American Trade Agreement. Then he essentially told Trump, "We've signed 12 new trade deals on 4 continents in 6 months, and I explained that to you in our phone call." He went ahead anyway. The China agreement held. Demand 2. Become the 51st state. This one sounds almost too bizarre to take seriously, and yet it has been a consistent, formal position of the United States government for over a year now. Trump has said it at the World Economic Forum. He's said it at rallies. His press secretary said Canada would benefit greatly from joining the U.S. His Commerce Secretary floated the idea of full economic integration as a stepping stone to statehood. Trump himself said he'd use economic force to make it happen. And Carney, the quiet, methodical economist, stepped up to a podium in Quebec City on January 23rd of this year, looked directly into the camera, and delivered what's already being compared to one of the most significant speeches by a Western leader in recent memory. He said, "Canada does not live because of the United States. Canada thrives because we are Canadian." Then he added, "We are masters in our home. This is our country. The choice is up to us." 90% of Canadians oppose annexation. And I want you to think about that number for a second. Finding 90% of a country agreeing on anything is nearly impossible. Trump's demand didn't just get rejected, it unified an entire nation against it. I'm genuinely curious whether you think this was a miscalculation on Trump's part or a deliberate strategy. Drop your read in the comments. Demand 3. Drop your economic nationalism. Canada introduced what it calls the Buy Canadian policy in December 2025. Every federal contract over $25 million now has to prioritize Canadian suppliers, Canadian materials, Canadian workers. It's a fundamental shift in how the government spends money, and it is a direct challenge to the decades-old arrangement that sent a huge chunk of Canadian procurement dollars to American companies. Trump's trade team wants it gone. They argue it discriminates against American firms. Jameson Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative, has specifically listed Canada's digital services policies, dairy protections, and domestic content requirements as key irritants heading into USMCA renegotiation this year. Carney's response was to double down. He's using that policy as leverage to pull foreign investment. Korean steel mills, German shipyards, Norwegian rare earth mining operations into Canadian soil. He's turned a domestic policy into a geopolitical tool, and he hasn't blinked. Demand 4. Accept a bilateral trade deal on Washington's terms. The USMCA, the trilateral trade deal between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, is up for review this year, and the Trump administration has made increasingly clear it would prefer to tear it up and negotiate separately with each country. The idea is simple. divide and conquer. Take on Canada alone, take on Mexico alone, get better terms from each. Carney rejected this framing publicly and explicitly. He pushed back on the suggestion that Trump even wanted out of the trilateral deal, saying, "That's not what they're saying." He refused to confirm he was willing to consider a one-on-one arrangement, and he's been quietly coordinating with Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum, inviting her to the G7, making official visits, rebuilding a common front. This is the part that most people are missing. Carney isn't just saying no to the US, he's building a coalition to make the no stick. Demand 5. Accept that compliance buys safety. This is the subtlest one, and arguably the most important. For the past year, Canada has tried to meet American concerns halfway. When Trump complained about fentanyl crossing the border, Canada spent $1.3 billion on new border security infrastructure, drones, surveillance gear, personnel. They appointed an official specifically to oversee fentanyl enforcement. They rescinded a digital services tax that Washington objected to, a move that cost Canada real revenue and was widely criticized domestically as a capitulation. None of it helped. The tariff stayed. The 51st state rhetoric intensified. Trump kept calling Carney Governor Carney as a deliberate provocation. At Davos in January 2026, Carney drew the clearest possible conclusion from that experience. He said, and I want to make sure I capture what he actually argued here without putting words in his mouth. Compliance does not buy safety. Great powers, he said, have begun using economic integration as weapons, tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. He didn't name the United States. He didn't have to. Trump heard it anyway. He responded from the Davos stage by saying, "Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark." Then he revoked Canada's invitation to join his so-called Board of Peace, a new international forum Trump is building that he envisions eventually rivaling the UN. Carney had already left Davos. He flew home and gave a national address. And here's where the picture starts to shift completely, because what looked like a confrontation between two leaders is actually something much bigger. Pull back from the specific demands, and you start to see this for what it really is. A test case for whether the post-World War II international order, the one built on rules, alliances, and the idea that raw power isn't the only thing that matters, can survive contact with a great power that has decided the rules no longer apply to it. Canada isn't special in this. Denmark is dealing with Greenland. Panama is dealing with the canal. Countries across the world are being asked, in various ways, to fall in line or face consequences. What Carney is doing, and this is the piece nobody is really talking about, is building the infrastructure for resistance. 12 trade deals in 6 months, meetings with Xi, coordinating with Sheinbaum, hosting the G7 in Kananaskis, giving speeches at Davos that get compared to Churchill's Iron Curtain address. He's positioning Canada not just to survive this pressure, but to lead something. The middle powers must act together line from Davos has already become a rallying cry. Australia, Germany, France, countries that feel the same squeeze, heard it. A Conservative MP in Canada, Matt Genereux, was so moved by the speech that he crossed the floor from the opposition to Carney's Liberals in February. He cited the Davos speech specifically as one of his reasons. That's not a diplomatic success. That's a political realignment happening in real time. Now here's the part that complicates the story, because it always does. Carney is not operating without constraints. Canada did roll back that digital services tax. Canada has committed to reaching NATO's 2% defense spending target by the end of this fiscal year. Canada has been careful to say it has no intention of a full free trade deal with China, threading a needle between diversification and outright defiance. And there are critics at home. Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner said Carney's Davos speech was strong on vision, but light on timelines and specific policy commitments. Some of Canada's domestic business community is worried that burning bridges with Washington, even if it feels righteous, could cost jobs in an economy that is still, for now, deeply woven into the American system. There is also this. The U.S. House of Representatives actually voted on February 12th to overturn Trump's tariffs on Canada. The vote was 219 to 211. Republicans crossed party lines. It won't become law. Trump would veto it. But think about what it signals. Even inside the U.S., the treatment of Canada is starting to generate political blowback. Canada supplies 60% of America's crude oil imports. It supplies 85% of America's electricity imports. It's the top export destination for 36 U.S. states. The economic pain of this conflict isn't one-directional, and some American lawmakers are starting to notice. So where does this actually go from here? The USMCA review is scheduled for this summer. That's the pressure point. Whatever Carney has been building, the bilateral deals, the coalition of middle powers, the Buy Canadian policy, the defense spending commitments, all of it becomes leverage for that renegotiation. He goes to the table not as a supplicant, but as a prime minister who has demonstrated he can survive without American goodwill, who has alternative partners lined up, and who has a domestic mandate to push back. Whether that leverage is enough is genuinely unclear. The economic asymmetry between the two countries hasn't changed. Canada still needs that border far more than the United States does. And a determined American president with control of tariff policy can cause real damage regardless of how many trade deals Canada signs with Korea or Germany. But something has shifted. A country that spent decades assuming the relationship with Washington was permanent, stable, and non-negotiable has woken up to the possibility that none of those things are guaranteed anymore. And its response has been to start building alternatives, quietly, methodically, at a pace that looked slow until suddenly it didn't. Carney is a central banker. He spent his career thinking about systemic risk, about what happens when the infrastructure people assume is unshakable turns out to be fragile. He saw the 2008 financial crisis coming before most people did. He's applying that same lens to geopolitics now. And his answer to Trump's 5 demands is the same answer a central banker gives when a counterparty tries to force unfavorable terms. Build your alternatives first, negotiate from a position of strength second, and never let the other side see you sweat. Whether it works, whether a country of 40 million can actually hold the line against the largest economy on earth, is the question nobody has answered yet. If you were sitting across that negotiating table from Washington this summer, what would you do? What's the move? Give me your read in the comments. I want to know how you think this plays out.